The West said never again after the Nazi genocide. But did they mean that to apply only when the victims are white? I'm Tony Karon. I'm the editorial lead at AJ Plus. And as a Jewish person, I was raised with these images of genocide seared into my brain from a very, very young age. It was grotesque images of Jewish bodies deliberately starved and brutalized by the Nazis that horrified the Western world to the point of prompting the resolve that genocide, the crime of crimes, could never be allowed to be repeated. And yet, here we are, seeing the images that echoed that same horror, documenting the same physical effects of deliberate starvation and brutalization, this time on the bodies of Palestinian children, and this time with the perpetrators being Jewish. Now, how is this monstrous inversion even possible in a world that has for decades insisted that this could never be allowed to happen again? Let's be clear, it's happening only because it is being allowed to happen. It's being allowed by the impunity that Israel is guaranteed by its Western armorers and enablers. And perhaps that impunity is maybe a horrifically twisted extension of the sensitivity to anti-Semitism prompted by the images of the Nazi Holocaust when they first appeared. Because Israel has shamelessly and cynically over the decades claimed the Nazi Holocaust as license for decades of settler colonial violence against the Palestinians it displaced and subjugated in order to create the State of Israel. In recent years, its advocates have even codified as anti-Semitic any statement that actually compares Israeli actions and policies with Nazi behaviors. Their problem is that Israel's actions invite that comparison. The images produced by those actions, which the world now sees in real time, make such comparisons unmistakable, whether or not the words are spoken. Nazi violence against Jews required that Jews be dehumanized in the minds of Germans. They used the term Untermenschen, inferior races. The Germans were the Übermenschen, the Herrenvolk as they called it, the master race, and the Untermenschen, the inferior races, were not worthy of being treated as human beings. So the never again guardrail against genocide really begins with the sensitivity to and fierce rejection of any dehumanization of any group of people. The problem for Israel is that the settler colonial project, the violent displacement and subordination of an entire people, which is what was necessary to create Israel, depends on dehumanization. As we've seen throughout the Gaza genocide, Israeli leaders are constantly comparing Palestinians to animals, to talk about human animals, talk about beasts. The consequences of such dehumanization was the focus of the film Zone of Interest, which won the Oscar a couple of years ago. This is a film about depicting the indifference of a German household living next door to Auschwitz. And the filmmaker Jonathan Glazer, who is Jewish, in his acceptance speech at the Oscar caused a stir because he said, this film is not about the past. This is not to say, look what they did then. It's rather, look what we do now. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. Glazer was hardly alone in making that connection. You can find dozens of examples over the years. The Israeli philosopher Yehashua Leibovitz in the late 1980s causes a stir by coining this phrase Judeo-Nazi. Saying that there's a Judeo-Nazi spirit driving the settler colonial occupation that would infect and doom all of Israeli society. Major General Yair Golan warns in 2016 that he's seeing in Israeli society the nurturing of an extremist behavior and attitude that basically is what in Germany had led to the Nazi Holocaust.
פוגרומים. הם הולכים לעשות פוגרום באנשים חפים מפשע.
Knesset member Ofer Kasif more recently likens Israel's plans for the Palestinians of Gaza to those of the Nazi regime to expel Germany's Jews in the 1930s. And then very recently, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert describes these plans for a humanitarian city that the Israelis are planning in Gaza to a concentration camp. These supposedly anti-Semitic connections between Israel's actions and Nazi actions have long been made by many Jewish public figures elsewhere in the world, and now with increasing frequency given what's happening in Gaza.
The reason that I think it's important to use the word ghetto is because it gives us language for what is happening now, which is that the ghetto is being liquidated.
You can't be more evil than what they're doing.
We've seen many Jewish Holocaust survivors warning over the years that they're seeing echoes of the same dehumanization and genocide that they survived in Europe.
I'm protesting against the misuse and weaponizing of the memory of the Holocaust as a cover for the current genocide by the Israeli government.
When I found out about the Holocaust, and I thought, how could the world have let this happen? Well, I don't wonder anymore.
So how do we make sense of the catastrophic moral failure of those who have for so long professed never again to halt a genocide that's actually within their power to stop? Talking about the Western powers here, they're not only failing to stop it, but they're actively enabling that genocide by arming the perpetrators and providing the impunity that they need. Could it be that these powers, in their actions and in their discourse, tacitly accept the dehumanization of the Palestinians, in the same way as those powers had for centuries themselves dehumanized the peoples that they had colonized? It was in 1950 when the grotesque images of the Nazi Holocaust first emerged to horrify Europeans that the anti-colonial writer Aimé Césaire called it a boomerang effect. He said the genocidal violence that Western powers had waged for centuries in the colonies had now come back to smash Europe. And he says, before they were its victims, they were its accomplices. They tolerated Nazism before it was inflicted on them. They absolved it, they shut their eyes to it, they legitimized it, because until then, it had been applied only to non-European peoples. So the images out of Gaza don't lie. Like the images from the Warsaw Ghetto, they really leave no doubt as to what's transpiring there. So today, Gaza should make us ask, how far has the West really progressed in refuting the deep-seated racism that allowed it for centuries to dehumanize, brutalize, and massacre people it colonized? Is there any explanation for Western acceptance and enabling of the Gaza genocide other than racism?